It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone, as we are live in the green space today. More than 100 people came to watch a radio show. Is that crazy or what? But you are those people, so thank you for coming. Give yourselves a round of applause. And as always, when we're in the green space, you can watch the Brian Lehrer Show as well as listen to it, because we have the capacity to stream live video from the green space stage. So you can just go to WNYC.org and watch us do the show. Also at thegreenspace.org, if that website is easier for you to get to. Joining me now is Ayman Ishmael. He is a Slate video producer and host of Who's Afraid of Ayman Ishmael, and he's been looking at the role of Muslim men in the emerging Mosque Me Too movement. For example, Muslims around the world, of course, celebrate Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's the requirement of Muslims who are healthy and can afford to do so to travel to Mecca at least once in their lifetime. Well, once they arrive, both men and women perform a ritual of praying while making 7 circles around the Kaaba. That's a black cubic structure in the middle of the Great Mosque. But that's where the similarities end. What's supposed to be an egalitarian ritual sometimes turns into instances in which women are sexually assaulted. We've covered the Me Too movement, obviously, by looking at sexual abuse in many walks of life, in the Olympics, at the Ford factory in Chicago, with low-paid workers, restaurant workers, on the show the other day, campus sexual assault. But what about religion? What role can the Me Too movement play in religions, and how can both genders work to facilitate that conversation? Welcome back to WNYC. I'm Ayman Ishmael.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody here. This is kind of amazing.
And just so people get a little context on you, the series that you're doing on an ongoing basis on Slate is Who's Afraid of Ayman Ishmael. And this started when you went to cover the Republican convention in Cleveland in 2016?
I love telling this story. It's so funny. We were trying to get our credentials. At this point, I was just a photographer. I was going to provide backup for the other reporters there to report on the RNC. And this person in this full-fledged Thomas Jefferson costume with the hat and everything approached me from behind and asked, "Are you a Muslim?" And in my mind, I was thinking, yes, finally, like this is really what I came for. I want to be everybody's one Muslim friend. So we started talking about his assumptions of what I believed, and I was helping walk him through what I actually do believe. And in the end, the conversation sort of abruptly ended when he refused to recognize that Thomas Jefferson was himself guilty of sex crimes.
And some of the videos that you have on this site, because this is mostly a video project, for example, Season 1, Episode 8. Everyone thinks Muslims shouldn't celebrate Christmas. I'm doing it anyway.
Right. That was to sort of explore something that I didn't really necessarily have the answers to. This comes up every year. I sort of debate with my other Muslim friends whether or not we're allowed to. Our parents sometimes believe that this is a religious holiday, so we shouldn't be celebrating the birth of Christ. But since, at this point, it sort of turned into just a festival of love and celebrating and family and eating. And those are all things that Muslims love to do, so why not?
It's an American holiday of shopping.
Yeah.
And another one, Season 1, Episode 6, Fox News claimed a Sharia court is enforcing Islamic law in Texas. So I went to see it. What did you see?
That guy was really funny. He would throw his hands up and be like, I don't know what all this attention is for. You know, all the religions have some sort of mediation center where people can elect to get advice from a spiritual counselor. And he is facing legal battle. So people are trying to shut him down because they're afraid of the word Sharia itself. And then they start projecting things like female genital mutilation or unequal treatment of women, things that he was happy to condemn on camera, but that didn't stop the lawsuit.
So those are some of the things that you do on a more lighthearted basis in your series. On a very serious note, in response to the Me Too movement, as you know, many Muslim women began sharing their experiences of sexual assault within their communities online, just like other women. But many Muslims, both men and women, are worried that speaking out about sexual assault and harassment will further promote anti-Islamic sentiment in America. Can you explain the tension there?
Yeah, I can't speak to the experience. I'm not a Muslim woman who experienced sexual harassment. But I could speak to how their stories are hijacked by people on the right and elsewhere who want to justify their bigotries. So, for example, when Mona El-Tahawi, the subject of the video, came out and was sharing her story, there were many people who were happy to use her story as evidence of the stereotype of Muslim men being barbarians who can't control their sexual desires. And it was also used as evidence of how an Islamic invasion of the West could be the end for women in the West, you know? So I think that's something that she had to consider before coming out and sharing her story, knowing that some people are ready to use that story to, assault the reputations of Muslim men.
As if there weren't enough barriers already to coming out with people's Me Too stories. So here's a clip of Mona El-Tahawi, the Egyptian-American activist and journalist, from your Who's Afraid of Ayman Ishmael Slate interview. This is 35 seconds of her story of sexual assault during Hajj.
We moved to Saudi Arabia when I was 15. And 3 weeks after my family moved to Saudi Arabia, we went on Hajj. And you know, you enter the Grand Mosque of Mecca and it's this wonderful feeling of reverence. It's incredible. And then I feel a hand on my ass. I'm like, are you kidding me? I must be imagining this. This cannot be happening.
Oh my God.
So I tried to squirm free, but this man is determined. He is on a mission and it is not pilgrimage.
Seriously?
He just kept his hand on my ass. He was determined. So I just burst into tears. How can I tell my parents when the Kaaba's right there that this bastard behind me is sexually assaulting me?
Whoa.
Yeah.
So how'd you come upon that story, and why did you feel that you should amplify it in your video series?
So the story itself came about when I came upon the hashtag MosqueMeToo, and that was all the work of Mona El-Tahawi. Her life's work has been to to elevate Muslim women's voices. And she did an excellent job in sharing that hashtag, and it was used several hundred times. You know, people were coming out from all over the world sharing their stories of sexual harassment. And these were all stories that they kept to themselves for so long. She herself kept that story to herself for years before having the courage to share it openly. And when she did, it became this phenomena of people on both the right and the left, and the Muslim men and not Muslim men, coming in and trying to discredit her. It was vicious, the attention that she got, the attacks on her character and the attacks on her credibility, just to, I think it's a misguided effort to protect the reputation of Islam. Or in the case of the right, it's a misguided effort to assault Islam in the West in general. So I think that really galvanized me in wanting to approach the story with a more nuanced lens and try to understand what makes it so hard for women who are Muslim to join the Me Too movement.
And the incident that Mona was describing there actually took place way back in 1982.
Right.
But it was this year when she shared her story on Twitter with that hashtag that you mentioned, MosqueMeToo, and that hashtag has inspired an outpouring of similar stories from other women. And what Mona told you essentially was, who would believe that something so terrible had happened in such a sacred place?
Yeah.
So is the issue here victim shaming, or is sexuality seen as too taboo to talk about, even in cases of assault, and that's the hurdle to get over?
I think it's a combination of both those things. But really, I think the root of the problem is that men in general are not properly educated on how to talk about things like sexual assault. I think, at least when I try to talk about it with Muslim men, their first initial reaction is to say, well, no, not all Muslim men are like this. You know, this probably doesn't happen as often as we're suggesting that it might. But I believe that one is too many, you know. These aren't people that are, far and few between. These are people within our own communities. And I learned it from myself. I made it my mission to try to talk to as many Muslim men as possible, and just as many men as possible about this this crime happening amongst us. So I think one of the reasons why it's so important for us men to talk about this issue is because ultimately it is a men's issue. This is something that's happening to women. It's not a women's issue in the sense that they have the power to control it or to end it. It's really up to us men to make sure that we create a safe environment where they don't have to worry about their safety.
So that's so true that this can't just be women speaking about things related to Me Too and other things having to do with gender equality that aren't even sexual harassment or assault. If men don't also step up and say these words and then actually help to police equality in their workplaces and things like that, it's just going to be so much harder to bring the change that, even if we say we want to see it and then don't do anything, it's not going to happen. Also joining us briefly now on the phone is Salma El-Kadi Adrubader, a licensed professional counselor in private practice, founding board member of a group called Peaceful Families Project, which is a national nonprofit focused on ending domestic violence in Muslim communities. Welcome to WNYC, Salma.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you having me on the show today.
So, with respect to the Peaceful Families Project, what has the Mosque Me Too hashtag or movement meant for your community and your practice?
I think that it's a really welcome opportunity for us to take what I've heard, in private conversation in my therapy office for more than 25 years, to take that into the public space. And it gives us a real opportunity to amplify the voices of survivors, and also to use this movement as a catalyst for change among the community leaders. And as Ayman is saying, and I appreciate your work, Ayman, for individuals also to become involved in ending sexual assault and all forms of gender-based violence.
Is your work, being in the Muslim community in general, dependent on being culturally aware and culturally sensitive? I mean, to some degree, like so many issues we talk about, the issues are universal, but the applications sometimes are more effective if we know, particular cultural practices or ways of communicating in whatever culture.
Absolutely. So the work that we do with Peaceful Families Project is all from within the Islamic paradigm. So we use Quranic teachings and the model of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, to really speak to people using the values that they already believe in, using verses that they're already familiar with, and just amplifying the mandate that we have as Muslims to stand for justice, to fight all forms of oppression, so that includes sexual assault, and to work together as believing men and women to enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. And obviously, any kind of sexual assault, especially in a religious space, is wrong and oppressive.
What's your understanding as a practitioner in this field of how religion, assuming that what you just said is true, gets misinterpreted to result in so many people feeling like the patriarchy is exactly what the religion enables?
I mean, I think this is common across faith traditions, that patriarchal values and misogyny can often, people can take teachings and misuse them, actually abuse them to further their purposes. We see that in many things in which, religion is hijacked to promote, people's objectives. But if people go back to their faith teachings, the values of, justice and mercy and, proper treatment for men and women, these are the values that we all know are true. But there will always be people who will take things out of context to further their own agenda or to justify their misbehavior.
Ayman, you want to get in on this with Salma? What are you thinking, or do you want to ask her anything?
I do want to ask whether or not the mass of women coming out and finally having a place to share this specific story, whether or not that we will see effect change, or what will it actually take to see the change that we all want to see?
I mean, I think that these conversations have to continue, and people have to keep talking, because breaking the silence really is the first step. And when enough people come forward and when the conversation is sustained, then leadership will be forced, to confront this issue and to make changes. So I think that, change is a process. It can take a lot of time, but we've already seen changes happening in the, general public, and with the Harvey Weinstein case. I mean, a lot of change is happening, and so we just have to be persistent in speaking about these issues, getting more people on board, getting individuals to see their role, rather than being passive bystanders, to actually jump in the conversation, to say, hey, that's not right. If they see something happening in front of them, to believe women when women come forward, rather than to first ask, well, what were you doing there, or how did you contribute to this? The victim blaming and victim shaming is what's kept people from coming forward. So the more people that, are willing to have this conversation, I think the more that it can be a real catalyst for change.
Let me ask you both, with respect to Hajj in particular, since that was sort of, the origin of the Mosque Me Too hashtag was Mona El-Tahawy telling her story of being sexually assaulted at Hajj, and then the larger thought that it's sadly common. One of the fears associated with the movement is that Muslim religious officials, who are predominantly men, might use it to segregate women from men during Hajj, which women are afraid might mean restricting women's access to the holiest part of the Great Mosque. I'm just curious if that idea has been floated, if either of you are aware, and what that might look like. Ayman?
Yeah, I think we've seen that same rationale used over and over again. It's the same logic that was used when advocating for women to be segregated at all. It's to save them from Muslim men in mixed spaces, and it's also the same logic that was used to restrict their ability to drive. So they wouldn't be caught alone and abused that way. But I think in both of those cases, it's never solved the issue at hand. Women still, as evidenced by the Mosque Me Too hashtag, still don't have a safe space. So I don't think that by further segregating the genders that we will be creating a safe space for them. I still think that it really comes down to policing the space better and making sure that there is no room for that kind of crime to take place.
So often separate is unequal, no matter what, in theory, people claim the intention is. Salma, any thought about that?
Sure. I mean, I agree with everything that Ayman said, and as a Muslim woman who's been both to Hajj and to Umrah, there are parts of, there are some of the rituals that are separated, like when we visit the Prophet's tomb. And I can say that as it is, women have less times when they have that opportunity to participate in the ritual. We already do have less access, and I think that it's really important, rather than women to again bear the brunt. So women have been victimized, and now they'll be having more, restricted access. That the focus has to shift where it belongs, which is on the perpetrators, and also on the broader society and leadership to educate people and to change people's attitudes so that there's a respect, and so that men who are performing Hajj are looking out for their fellow sisters in Islam who are also trying to perform this very important ritual, that we should be working together to create this climate of safety. And the leadership has to also take a strong stand and have punishments for those people who are offending.
Yeah. One more clip from Mona El-Tahawy from your video with her, Ayman, in which she weighs in on what she wants to happen next.
I insist, I demand that the Imam of the Grand Mosque talk about this. Get on the pulpit and say, you must respect sisters everywhere, especially here during Hajj. This has to be said out loud. And I don't want him to say, we're going to protect you. I don't want him to say, we're going to segregate you. I want none of those things. I want him to put this front and center and talk about this, because all these men who are writing to me saying you're lying, you're making us look bad, who paid you, it's a Zionist, it's the I don't know what. No, once he says it, a whole bunch of men who don't want to believe us will hear it.
So to finish up, Ayman, as a Muslim man and a journalist, How do you see your role in this?
Specifically as a Muslim man and a journalist, I think it's up to people like me, and it's also up to people like you to make sure that men everywhere are held accountable. I agree that everything really does come down to accountability, and it's not a unique issue for the Muslim world. It's sort of a universal issue. And I really do in my heart believe that if we make sure that the criminals who are committing these crimes are held accountable for their actions, and the people who are supposed to create this safe space are also held accountable, that will be a much more effective means of destroying sexual harassment in a place like Hajj than merely segregating the genders.
Ayman Ishmael is host of Slate's video series, Who's Afraid of Ayman Ishmael? Salma El-Kadi Abu Jader is a counselor in private practice and a founding board member of the Peaceful Families Project. Thank you so much both for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC will continue live in the green space.